Hi everyone, my name is Jose Alamos. I'm going to present a research that was part of the CIPEM International Conference 2021, Perspectives in Music Psychology and Music Education in Porto, Portugal. This presentation is called Cognitive Processing of Rhythm, Implication for Musical Training in Primary School. Practicing rhythm is an important part of people's musical and integral development. Perhaps because of this, music education dedicates significant efforts to rhythmic training, especially in early childhood and primary education. One way to facilitate rhythmic learning could be to consider theories and studies on cognitive processing. However, currently the use of these theories and research findings to promote musical learning in schools seems to be scarce. The aim of this research was to determine the factors that facilitate the processing of rhythmic information and discuss their scope in achieving perceptual productive rhythmic learning in primary education. A letter to review was done, obtaining articles from the WOS and Scopus databases. In addition, research manuals on music education and texts on music psychology were reviewed. According to the source consulted, the factors that facilitate rhythmic processing are mainly the pulse, some optimal tempo range, the meter and accents, and the temporal structuring grouping given mainly by the rhythmic patterns. The pulse is one of the most hierarchic and intuitive elements within the music of various cultures, especially within the rhythmic structure. There seems to be a consensus that human beings tend toward isochrony and regularity. Despite being an external element, the isochronous pulse seems to manifest itself naturally in humans due to its relationship with the nervous system. Some authors have speculated on a cognitive bias toward isochrony in music. This bias could be due to enculturation processes or biological aspects. Specifically, an underlying regularity or pulse could be a fundamental aspect for the perception of simple rhythmic sequences and for rhythmic processing in general. This will be explained in part by the internal clock theory, by the dynamic ascending theory, and more recently by the theory of predictive coding. All three theories coincide that the regularities perceived from the beginning of a sound sequence provide a reference that the auditor uses to create expectation about what is to come. Tempo is another factor that makes rhythmic processing easier. Snyder proposed that the music information processing limits appear to lie in the tempo range between 30 and 300 bits per minute. Below this range, sounds are perceived as elements from separate sequences, while above 300 bits per minute, sounds tend to be perceived as a single event. Specifically, the measurement of 100 pulses most facilitates rhythmic musical processing for most people. This has also been proposed by other authors, such as Parenthood in 1994. These ranges are associated with the human need for synchronization during community and collective activities. Other studies indicated that slower tempi are more difficult for younger students. This is consistent with some results showing that young children have a preferred tempo between 140 to 150 beats per minute, which is faster than that of adults. The preference for fast tempos decreases with age, while responses to a greater diversity of slow and fast tempos improve due to cognitive and motor development. A third element are the meter and the accents. The meter provides a referential framework that forces incoming information, contributing to prediction and anticipation, both crucial to the perception of music and particularly rhythm. People can perceive strong and weak poles by ranking and organizing them according to their sound intensity. This hierarchy allows the grouping of poles in a larger subordinate unit and the future detection of regular events. This process appears to be automatic, since searching for metric accent is evident even when listening to non-metric sequences. In Western music, the most common meter result from grouped beats every 2, 3, and 4. The most frequent meter seems to be 4, 4. The figure shows an example of a hierarchical metric structure for the case of 4, 4. More points represent a greater accentuation and fewer points a lesser accentuation. The trend toward binary meters seems to be universal. However, research that considers cultural aspects indicate that this trend is closely related to enculturation processes. In this sense, some findings suggest that babies were born prepared to process any matter, but due to cultural aspect, a perceptual specialization of the meter is generated during the first year of life, or even before birth in utero. In summary, meter discrimination is essential for a correct psychological understanding of music, body movement, and language. In relation to the rhythm, the listener perceive, remember, and reproduce rhythmic pattern more efficiently when presented within a metric system. Furthermore, rhythmic reproduction is better for strongly metric rhythms. Additionally, Gembris shows that 5-year-old children can maintain a meter. A fourth element that facilitates rhythmic processing is grouping and rhythmic patterns. The grouping process is essential to musical perception since it influences the fragmentation of sounds in memory, facilitating perception and memorization. Besides, clustering seems to be an automatic process that occurs rapidly in the brain without requiring the use of attention. Here we see a scheme of hierarchical grouping and segmentation structure based on the generative theory of tonal music by Lerdahl and Jackendorf. This scheme was developed by Alamos and Tejada in 2020. The regularity is a critical element in processing rhythmic patterns. This may be because regularity predicts and anticipates structure and position in the pattern's time. This phenomenon has been widely studied in theories related to prediction and expectations. It seems that one-to-one and two-to-one relationships are broadly distributed in all cultures, making it easier to reproduce and perceive 2-to-1 ratios over 3-to-1 ratios. Also, rhythms with 2-to-1-to-4 or 2-to-1-to-3 ratios are easier to reproduce than rhythms with complex non-integer ratios. A good example of a 2-to-1 ratios applied to musical education is the macrobeat and microbeat proposed by Gordon. When the theories and results presented have been considered, questions arise about their transfer to the music classroom. Specifically, how and through what didactic strategies the scientific finding about temporal and rhythmic processing can be used to facilitate rhythmic musical formation in the initial stages. The strategies can be multiple, as you can see in the image. So, the question is, which medium will be the best? Recent findings show that among all the possible didactic paths, the best will be the use of body movements. This is explained because most of the scientific literature reviewed by this author studied the cognitive interrelationship that rhythm has with movement. It's known that body movement has played an important role in musical training, especially in early childhood. Also, it is used within methods like Orff, Willems, and especially Dalcroze. The link between sensory and motor system provides a sophisticated mechanism for temporal prediction and feedback, which has led to link that movement influences the way certain rhythmic elements are perceived. Movement could have an effect on the way the pulse, metric organization, and rhythmic patterns are perceived. Specifically, some studies have indicated that performing a rhythm is the product of a general sensorimotor faculty of the human brain. Considering all this information, here are some suggestions for musical training in primary education. 1. The use of isochronous pulse should be encouraged, since a biological propensity to isochrony in humans is presumed. 2. A tempo around 100 to 120 beats per minute should be considered, since this will be an optimal range that facilitates certain rhythmic activities and promotes the natural body expression. 3. Methods of binary accentuation should be promoted, since the existence of a cognitive predisposition toward them is speculated. 4. Rhythmic sequences with 2-to-1 ratios should be used due to their regularity, which makes their processing and production easier. Finally, the conclusion and future direction are as follows. Pulse, certain range of tempo, meter and accents, grouping and rhythmic patterns will be fundamental elements within rhythmic musical learning. Body expression is one of the most effective ways for developing rhythmic skills. In the future, empirical studies should be carried out in primary school to confirm or refute the findings and theories presented in this review. In addition, the characteristic of the learning activities should be specified. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.